All right. Well, we are thrilled to welcome on once again recurring guest Emily from Optics EQ. May Emily, one of the coolest names on Twitter. That's a fact. Emily, thank you for joining me this time for the Preakness. Last year, the Derby. We got you again this Triple Crown season. So thank you for spending the time.
Yeah, I absolutely. I totally enjoy talking. And I was telling you beforehand, I watched your Derby coverage. I thought you did an excellent job. And obviously, I follow your regular podcast throughout the year, which you obviously do an excellent job on as well.
Well, I appreciate it. And, if you keep throwing compliments my way, you can come on every week. But we talked with you last week or last year for the Derby. I just want to check in with you, between now and then, like how did your year end? How have you been since the last time we talked with you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some changes as far as work. I mean, a lot of my work still goes through Optics EQ, which is a company that I'm a partner in as far as the information provider. And we talked about last year, and then we had you on to look at some stuff with my partner John. So I'm still working with that, doing some stuff with Twin Spires. But I got hired last year around September to work at Hawthorne Racecourse, which is the racetrack here in Chicago. And for me, I've been absolutely loving that experience and that opportunity. It's my first real racetrack job, like working at one particular track. I do a lot of stuff for a lot of different tracks, but to actually kind of have a base in the city that I now live in is really cool. And so I've kind of expanded on that. They've given me a lot of creative freedom as far as things that maybe we're kind of just missing as an industry, right? You kind of get stuck, everybody gets stuck in their ways and bring new people on and the way things have changed. So I have a lot of creative freedom. I'm on the simulcast show every day talking the races. Got to do some tournament coverage, went out to Vegas, covered the tournaments out there because tournament coverage, I think actually you would really like it. Tournament play is where I got started, and it's a big space for people because it's, you buy into the tournament, you're playing against other people, and it's who has the highest bankroll. You don't have to have every winner. You kind of have that set outcome. And then you can just kind of rise to the ranks, right? You can play, like, if I know, as you play daily fantasy, you can play just, for kind of some small dollar amounts, but then it can lead all the way up to championships, which at Hawthorne, we sent out a lot of players to the NHC that had $1 million bonus if they won. So it's a good place for people to get involved. So I'm kind of shifting in that direction and doing the stuff at Hawthorne. So that's been pretty much taking up my time and keeping me busy, to say the least.
I would say so. I mean, that's awesome to hear that someone, is finding a place that they're just like really enjoying working at and finding their niche and um, rolling into it. So that's awesome news that has happened since the last time we talked. And I imagine you are very busy. That's one of the reasons why I missed you for the Derby. I waited too long. I didn't have the gall to be like, hey, can you jump on like Derby week? I figured you had a ton of stuff going on, so I wanted to get ahead of the Preakness and but fantastic news. I mean that's awesome. And you're right about the tournament stuff. There's a podcast that I listen to around like college football season, but the guy on there talks about um, he's a big horse racing guy and talks about being in tournaments all the time. And I've kind of been like, what's he talking about? So really cool that you're running that stuff. And I will have to
Yeah,
give that a
and
look.
while I'm talking about that and kind of like bringing it into the Derby as well, is two Phil's the horse that both, I know you liked, and the horse that
Mm-hmm.
I liked and was both financially and started to get emotionally invested in, because he's stabled here at Hawthorne at our track. And most of the horses are based, either they're out in California or Kentucky or out in New York, Florida. So for us, it was a big deal. And then when you're like looking at the race and you're like, this horse has a shot. Like, this horse can win this race, and he ran incredible. I mean, he looked very live. I thought he was going to run a good race. He ran a great race. In my opinion, and it is a game of opinions, I thought he ran the best race of that field. He was up close to the fast pace. He was between horses. He was taking pressure from both sides. He had to fend off Mage late and really had to be pressured for those 10 furlongs. And that's part of the reason why they're not running back. I know that's kind of controversial for people, like, well, why aren't they running? You just finished second. And sometimes with horses, they are living things, and when they've been, he ran a very, very, very taxing race, the type of race that's going to need recovery. And, Mage by default being able to kind of close into that pace, that fast pace, didn't quite have to run as hard. So that assists him coming back on this short turnaround.
Well, following Two Phil's like journey, and not really following it, but looking into the history of it and then getting caught on board for the bandwagon run for the Derby, um, knowing that he was from Chicago, that Larry Ravelli guy, I didn't put like two and two together. I mean, that's awesome that he was at your track. So now, things are kind of clicking in my mind there of like, because you were kind of like retweeting a lot of stuff that I was like, damn, like this is awesome. And now it kind of makes sense to me. And I was saying the same thing, like as the race was happening, everyone that I was watching with, I was saying, because we were all cheering for the same horse too. He's running his race. Like this is perfect. He's in a great spot. This is exactly what he wants. Because Ravelli was saying, what he wanted that horse to do, and he followed it to a T. So really ran like you said, a perfect race. And it was just, not enough, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's really just, it was horse racing, right? It's like a lot of times you take a tough beat and you're frustrated because it's like, oh, I had the best horse and I just got unlucky, and I should have won, and it kind of sticks with you for a while. And this result, it was like so easy to just be like, okay, because the horse did everything, right, and he just got caught late, and that happens, and you turn the page, but you're like, I got a great price, I was on the right horse, I maximized my opinion betting, my bets were heavy towards that horse, to where if he wins, that maximizes my opinion at the windows as well. And that's just what you want to be doing as a player, right? So it's like you do everything right. When it doesn't work out, you can just easily move on because you're putting yourself in the right position.
Yeah, that's right. You're not losing sleep over it because you gave it your best. And it's like that in any sport. And you move on a little bit easier than maybe if it something wonky were to happen during the race and you feel kind of like you got gypped. So
Yeah, well, and to kind of tail that, like last year, because we did the show last year, and we were both on Mo Donegal.
mm-hmm.
And so Mo Donegal kind of stung even a little bit more to me because he was, he was off the pace with Rich Strike, and the rider of Rich Strike made the first move, and it was kind of a tricky type. I mean, the ride on Rich Strike was incredible, but the way that he made that first move, it was when the horses were still going forward, right? So he was able to kind of go like, with the momentum of the race, to where the ride on Modonigal kind of waited a little bit to make that move. And by the time Modonigal started to make his move, that's when all the horses started to go backwards, right? So then he's trying to like navigate traffic, and he has to swing wide, while Rich Strike is able to kind of ride the momentum, stay on the inside, pick those holes, and get his way forward, right? So like that one kind of stung. And then, then you're like, oh, well, now my opinion's validated, because then he comes back and wins the Belmont.
Yeah. that is true. Just when you forget about that, that comes back up again and bites you. You're right.
Yeah.
So we're going to touch on Mage in a second here, but just to close things out with the Derby, I had just a couple quick questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
The first, kind of taking things in like a chronological order, like recapping it, the amount of scratches that we had for the Derby early in the week. I mean, I was on Practical Move. I know they scratched him early because of a fever. But the amount, I think, was like kind of weird to someone who is, I'm a fair weather fan, I guess, Triple Crown, and I try to throw myself into it fully. But obviously I'm not in it like you. So are you, concerned about what's going down there at Churchill? Obviously it's making news. Something else just happened today as we're speaking. So, or maybe it was yesterday. What was going on there? Was it fact that trainers and owners were like scared to push it, because they didn't want to make news, or was it something else going on?
No, I mean, I think there's always a lot of factors, and again, it comes back to, horses are living creatures, where things can change all that time at any point in time. And I think for some of those horses, they just, there was two horses that scratched that came out of California, both Skinner, Practical Move. So I don't know. Sometimes, we get sick on planes, like we don't travel well. That was part of the thing, with Two Phils, is they were like, oh, well, he hasn't been training here and all that stuff. And I'm like, we're a 4-hour van ride away. Like that's nothing. That's like,
Yeah.
That's better to stay at home than, when you have to fly. It's really, it's tough. It's a big change of scenery. So I think that came into it where both Skinner and Practical Move got a little bit sick. They weren't 100%. They had to scratch. You never really want to run your horse in this type of race when they're not 100%, because it's not even so much that it can be like catastrophic injury, but if you have a good horse, you don't want to like mess with their psychology as well, right? Like put them in a stressful situation when they're not well, and then they don't end up wanting to race ever again, because that can happen. So I think there was that. And then Forte, who was the favorite going into the race, he ended up getting a bruise, and so I think that scratch was pretty precautionary, as far as the vets just saying, look, we know it's minor, the horse would probably be fine, but protocols are protocols, they are what they are. I'm trying to remember who some of the other scratches were. One of the Japanese horses, Continuar, I want to say. It was just a horse that just hadn't acclimated. Like watching him train, he just was like not looking like he was in top form. So for whatever reason, so they just decided this horse, we don't want to embarrass ourselves putting a horse out there that's just gonna, run behind the field, and let's regroup and figure out what's going on, and then it also, as far as like the horses that drawn off the also eligible list, and this was one of the concerns with Mandarin Hero, which is a horse that was coming out of the Santa Anita Derby along with Practical Move and Skinner, was they were unlikely to get into the race a week before, right? And they were actually thinking about going to the Preakness. So that kind of messes with the training a little bit, right? Because if you're training up to a big race, you're putting all the, everything together. You're like, we're going to get this horse peaked on the day. And then you're like, well, I don't really want to get my horse peaked in training for a race we're not going to run in. So then it kind of turns into like a maintenance move. And so he ends up running, but not running very well. And I think it was kind of the same thing with a lot of the other horses that were on the also eligible list, where they just, weren't really planning on running, maybe not quite peaked. And then by the time they're on that outside post, that's just a tough thing to overcome as well. But yeah, it is, as you mentioned, somebody that's kind of from the outside and then reads the headlines and it's like, what is going on? And I have those questions too. And as somebody in the industry, because things can be outliers. This happened at Santa Anita a few years ago where there was a lot of injuries, and horses. A couple of them were horses that had acted up in the paddock and caused themselves injury. And so you always want answers as to what's going on, but also keeping in mind, because the headlines will say X amount of horses died at Churchill Downs, and if you don't really understand horses, like horses, their legs are pretty much their survival, right? Like if they're in the wild, they have to run with the pack, they have to run to keep themselves safe from predators and things like that, and be in that pack. And three-legged horses don't exist. Like if there's a horse that's to their limb and they have that traumatic injury, it's not something that they survive from, and they certainly won't heal from in nature. And so it's a tough decision on the racetrack, but it's the decision that sometimes these tough decisions are often the best decisions, because you're looking at the well-being of this horse and saying, this is not an injury where this horse is going to survive. If we can look at it and we can repair it, by all means, that's what we're going to do. But in most cases, it's sort of like prolonging the inevitable and putting the horse through more pain and suffering than they deserve. And so when these horses are, when they decide to humanely euthanize, it's a decision that is never easy. It never gets easy. Even myself, I have days where it's like, I just, I got to take a break and like go for a walk. Like it just never goes away, but you just have to know, like, that's just part of how horses are. And, that's what's going to happen. But we do also have to figure out, when these numbers get high, are they outliers, or is there something going on, and how do we improve on that?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, it's just understanding the animal and the game overall. And just like anything else, you got to read, more than just the headline to really form a real opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, we see, it's not, this isn't really fair to do like a one-to-one comparison, but we'll see all the time, like where there's wrecks, in the Cup
Yeah,
Series or
no,
any Cup
NASCAR, yeah,
Series, and it's like you're done. And sometimes that
yeah,
car is like not coming back. You can't repair it. There's these things are, you're kind of just making that decision, but it does like again, and it's tough all around.
yeah, 100%. Then last question about the Derby. You could take this either direction. Somebody that kind of surprised you that you were maybe on and perform like outperform your expectations in a good way, or the other way. Somebody that you were kind of excited about that really let you down. Do you have either one of those?
Yeah, typically that's like an easy one where I can just like toss out a name. And this year it was so different. It was a race that was run like a normal horse race. And we'll kind of get into that as we talk about the Preakness, because I kind of feel the same way. And even we were talking beforehand, and I sent you a message because you were like, "Oh, I'm doing my show," and I was like, the thing is, this field is really wide open.
Yeah.
Yeah, from if you look at sort of the quote unquote best horse in the field, Forte at that time, to the quote unquote worst horse in the field, the horse that was the lowest on points, there was just not much separation. And so when they ran this race, it was really a matter of, which horse got the right trip, ran their top race. And we saw that. It came out, the top two finishers, and I think everybody else was kind of running for those underneath spots. I don't think there's anybody that I was super excited to bet back. And I think that's also part of the reason why we're not seeing many of those horses show up in here. And it's just kind of that crop this year where there's a lot of horses that just haven't really emerged as being that top talent. And I don't know if we'll see that. And at the same time, as a horse player, it makes for more competitive horse races, right? Because you're handicapping them as horse races and saying, there's really no quote unquote best horse in this race, on that day. And so as a player, you can kind of start to take advantage of that, where the third best horse might turn up to be the best horse on the day, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
No, yeah, I'm following you.
Yeah.
So, um, I guess any other last thoughts on the Derby before we look ahead? Ponytail?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think
We're
it's,
ready to
yeah,
move on.
just go onward.
So one of the things that um, you know, looking at Two Phil's, his trainer came out and said right away, kind of like you alluded to, they were not going to be able to run the Preakness. So if he had won, I would have been happy on that day. But 2 days later, I would have been like, damn, because the Triple Crown means a lot to the Fairweather horse racing fans like myself. So I'm thrilled that Mage is running in it. So we've got Mage, and it looked like Confidence Game was thinking about running, but they backed out. So he's the only one running, and it's a very small field. So we'll go through this here. I have a visual here for anyone who's watching on YouTube. Just a quick rundown of the horses here. We've got National Treasure, and they did the post draw on Monday. So we've got National Treasure going off from the one post 4-1. We've got Chase the Chaos 50-1. Mage is the 3 horse 8-5. Coffee with Chris 20-1. Red Route 1 10-1. Perform is 15-1. Blazing Sevens is 6-1. And First Mission is 5-2. So 8 horses. We're just coming from a potential 20 horse field. Now we're down to 8. So as a handicapper, as a better player, uh, what's your take on this? Because to me, I guess throughout this conversation, I'm going to throw you like my thoughts, and then you can correct me, with your expertise. But to me, it seems like there's less variance here. There's more of an opportunity to really like zero in on the right choices here, because you don't have that long shot coming from the back. You don't have someone coming from left field that you maybe had dismissed because it's such a large field. 8 horses, you can really dive into each one significantly and really make an educated choice. So am I off on that, or do you kind of have a general agreement there?
No, I think you're right on. I mean, when you have those big fields, there's so much chaos that can come out, right? Because you could have a horse that gets into traffic and gets into trouble, because those things happen with those big fields. It's less likely when you have a compact field, right? To just get stuck behind a wall of horses. So yes, you're completely right on. And then that's when you see horses that you could completely dismiss, or horses that finish, third, fourth in the Derby Superfecta that just kind of happen to be in the right place at the right time in order to get those spots. Where here you're going to look at, you have a little bit more form. You have some of these horses that maybe you can eliminate a couple horses. So let's say if we're looking at this field, and we'll pick on the two long shots, right? We'll pick on Chase the Chaos and Coffee with Chris. If you're assessing both those horses and you're saying both these horses cannot compete in this field, like they're too slow, they're too overmatched, whatever that assessment is. So you eliminate them, right? So now you're looking at a 6-horse field, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can kind of go through that process again, and then be like, okay, well, let me start with the favorite. Is this a horse that I think is legitimate? And start to kind of change your process a little bit, and that can help, make your opinion so you know who you're going to play to win, or key on a horse in an exacta or trifecta or in that pick 4 in those sequences, where that's a lot harder to do in the 20-horse field. You can eliminate some horses from contenders, but then it's really tough to then be like, but can I eliminate this horse from running fourth? I don't know. Anybody can run fourth,
Yeah, they can run in the top 50% of the race.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Mage, obviously, first, because he's the favorite. He's the one we all care about. For anyone on YouTube, I've just got a general visual here. So we'll flip to Mage, and this is the one that I think a lot of people are rooting for, just because they want that second leg of the Triple Crown, and we want the Belmont, for that, fanfare. So when he first won, my original thought process was great. We've great win for that horse. But I was initially thinking that maybe Forte, Practical Move, Skinner, some of these other horses would be joining the Preakness field. So they're not here. And so it does seem like Mage could pull off a Preakness win and go to Belmont with the opportunity to Triple Crown. Now, looking at some of the details here, I saw one article talking about like his buyer's speed rating in the Derby was like 105, and typically for the Preakness you need like around a 102. So if he's able to keep that same form, this is a horse that could very easily get this done. So going off as the favorite kind of makes sense, just because everybody's going to be hammering him anyway. So I guess what's the general vibe that you have on Mage, especially starting in a 3 spot? He's surrounded by those 2 horses that you just mentioned. So are they going to get in his way, or is that going to be problematic, or what's your general thought process on Mage right now early in the week?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that we'll look at it. One from the betting standpoint, right? Because he's listed as the morning line favorite, and I'll just send out a reminder in general, just for people that are not typical horse players, because it's different than sports betting. Is horse racing is based on a pari-mutuel system, so everybody's betting into the same pool. So if the odds are constantly fluctuating just based on where the public is putting their money. Okay. So as we see, what the morning line is telling you is how they think the public is going to bet this horse. They think he'll be 8-5. Whether he's 8-5 or not, I'm not sure, but we know he's going to be the favorite in this race. And part of being the favorite of this race is, winning the Derby, having those strong speed figures. And then there's the hype that comes out of it, right? Like, as far as being like, well, he's the Derby winner. So that there's the prestige that comes with that. Then there's kind of another factor people don't really talk about all that much is, and this kind of goes both ways, is there's, a group of people that dismissed him at 15-1 and will think, well, I don't want him to beat me again. Like, he beat me last time. I don't want him to beat me again. Yeah. And so then they're using a horse that they might otherwise be like, I was right to not like this horse, for those reasons. So you do kind of have to separate that a little bit. Is basically just kind of start with looking at this race as a whole and how does Mage fit in with this field, right? And my handicapping process is pretty much always the same, right? Is it'll start with pace. Does the horse have the right running style for today's race shape? Speed. Is this horse fast enough to compete? As you mentioned, He probably doesn't have to run back to a 105. Optic Speed Figures also has that as a 105 in order to win. But even if he regresses a little bit, which is obviously a little bit likely coming back on 2 weeks rest up a new top, even if he regresses a little bit, is he still fast enough to win? He doesn't have to be the fastest. He just has to be fast enough to win. Is the horse in form? That's a concern, right? Because is he, he's coming back in 2 weeks. He's never run back in 2 weeks. He's never run back off a top figure in 2 weeks. Has he been able to maintain his form from that race to this race, training wise, physicality wise, and then class. And class we'll probably get into with some of these other horses, but in horse racing, there's different levels. Grade 1 is the pinnacle, right? That's the top. That's the highest level. The grade 1 event, where he's coming out of the Kentucky Derby, is a grade 1. Some of these horses kind of stepping up in class. So again, it's not necessarily class to concern. He's already proved himself at this level, but making that transition for some of these other horses that will be stepping up in class, that can be a challenge. So again, it just kind of goes back to assessing the favorite. Is the horse going to get the right trip with his running style? Is he fast enough? Is he in form? And is he in the right level to compete? And that's sort of the way I approach every race, and kind of the Derby, Preakness, Belmont. I don't really make much exceptions from that.
Okay. Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. I mean, he was able to, his style, I guess, that stalker type race, he was able to pull that off easily. It seemed like, got the run that they were looking for in a smaller field. Like, it seems like we do have a couple horses that are going to like set the pace.
Mm-hmm.
But does Mage, I don't know, get thrown off a little bit by a smaller field potentially? Because it seems like, looking at it, there's like one or two horses that like to set the pace. I think maybe, I don't know, I have my notes here, but a lot of them are stalkers. So
Yeah.
if there's only 8 horses, then how can all of them be stalkers? Essentially, they're all going to be like trying to ride behind First Mission or whoever is leading on the first
Yeah.
turn. So
I
how does that work out for a favorite like this?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the right question. And really, the perhaps maybe the one kind of challenge with Mage, right, is he's a lightly raced horse. He's only raced 4 times. And going back to his debut, he broke his maiden first out. So he won at first asking. And he did so while he was on the lead. And he earned a very strong speed figure for that race. And that was a race that really caught everybody's eye. So after that, he went into the Fountain of Youth, and it might have been it was just a second start. He was again stepping up in class, right, from a maiden condition to a graded stakes race, and it was also going to be his first start around 2 turns. And in that race, he was up close to the pace, kind of stalking about 1 length off the pace setter, and then ended up losing ground late, losing by six lengths to finish fourth. After that race, he ran the Florida Derby, and this is when he finished second behind Forte, and he broke slow. And so he made this big middle move, ended up taking the lead off the turn and then getting run down by Forte. And that was kind of the same running style back in the Kentucky Derby, where he broke a little bit slow, had that fast pace, as you mentioned, 2 fills and all those other front runners. All the other front runners besides 2 fills finished last or next to last, right? So it was really favoring horses that were making that big late run. But as we talk about this, so again, it's a horse that he has been able to show early speed, but as of late, he's been most effective making that late run. So it is interesting, like how they're going to ride Mage, right? Because if they take kind of that similar approach where they're well off the pace, they're going to make that one run, which has been effective. That's how he's been able to run very effectively in those 2 most recent starts. But is that going to give up an advantage to a horse that's going to be able to take first run? And if that horse that's able to get first run, is a fresh horse, is another horse that's fast enough, is at the right class level, that horse could beat Mage. He gets first run, they get the trip. So I think that is the kind of the biggest challenge as far as Mage, and maybe the way he ends up getting beat in this race, because it is a little bit tough to assess form at this week coming back in 2 weeks. But having another horse that's going to be able to get first run, and especially in this case too, they call this kind of like if you weren't there for the wedding, why are you going to show up for the funeral, right? Because the wedding being when he wins at 15-1, and now he's going to come back being 4-5. So, you don't like, what side do you want to be on this? That it just it's going to create opportunities on the others in the field. And how disappointed are you going to be if you like somebody else, you're like, maybe there's a chance he gets beat. And if he beats you, are you going to really be that worried, that sad at the end versus taking a shot, right?
Yeah,
With some
yeah.
of the other horses. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on there, but again, it kind of comes down to how as a player you want to kind of approach that, right? Because he's going to be a short price.
Yeah, we call that in my little friend group. We call that betting for our happiness, right? You bet against Mage for another horse at a better price, and if he beats you, great. We have a Triple Crown opportunity to see history kind of deal. So, yeah, that's funny. And the not there for the wedding, there for the funeral is one I've never heard, but I absolutely love it. So well played. So speaking of other horses, I'm just going to throw some different horses out here. I want to go to this horse for a reason, because we mentioned a horse that might potentially be able to kind of get ahead and, maybe keep the lead. And not listed as a pace setter, but someone, that I've seen in my research here over the last week said that this horse might have potential to potentially go wire to wire. And it's the one horse, National Treasure. This is Bob Baffert's horse. And from what I've seen, my notes, Emily, talented runner. They need to keep them focused. They're putting blinkers on for this race to hopefully, keep them, looking forward and getting there. And Velasquez is on the horse, and his mindset coming in, or what they're trying to tell him, is be very aggressive. So maybe in the past he wasn't necessarily a pace setter, but just try to get out front and say, forget everybody else. We're just gonna, blow the doors off these guys. So ran fourth at the Santa Anita, lost to a Practical Move. But because there potentially is less pace in this race overall, that would then open the door for a horse like this to kind of go and get out there and stay up front. So anything that you hate about those notes on National Treasure, and any thoughts on this one overall?
Yeah, I mean, from a running style standpoint, he's kind of another one of those horses that he's not really a confirmed one style or another. So he's another horse that, going back to his first start, broke his maiden on debut and did so on the front end. So he was able to win gate to wire, as we'll say, get out in front, control all the way. And then the second start was kind of the same thing. He was stretching out in distance. It was a graded stakes race. He sat 1 to 2 lengths off the eventual winner, and then finished second, beaten by 5 lengths. So he's a horse that definitely has tactical speed. I think the horse that is the confirmed front runner, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on there because the horse is a little bit on the slower side, is Coffee with Chris. I think Coffee with Chris is going to go. National Treasure being drawn inside, he has options, right? Because if that other horse is slow, he could push the pace from that spot. He's certainly fast enough that he can make the lead. And in worst case scenario, he's probably not going to be worse than second at the half mile at the first or second point of call. He's going to be in that 1 to 2 spot. And is the superior horse to Coffee with Chris. So once that horse starts to back up, National Treasure will be right there. As far as his numbers, he's been a horse that's been, so you mentioned like being a little bit more aggressive, because he's just been so consistent. He's running similar speed figures, not quite getting the win, but there's nothing that's really a bad race. He's kind of, when I watch him, he's a little bit, we give this keyword plotty, where he's just a little bit one-paced. And they've had the blinkers on in the past, so they're putting the blinkers on again. And I'm just trying to look at some of his works to see if he's been working. Yeah, he's been working in blinkers. It's not a huge cup of blinkers. It's pretty shallow. But he's been training well since the Santa Anita Derby. He did have a little bit of trouble in there at the start. But a lot of the races this year out in California, they were just so strangely run because they were small fields, and most of the runners in the field were Baffert runners. So it was like, how much are you trying to beat your stablemate? With these small kind of trading places, it was really hard to kind of assess form, like, with that. And a lot of the horses like Reincarnate, one of the horses that ran in the Derby, it is a horse that was running against National Treasure in some of the races, won that Sham Stakes 3 back, that grade 3 Sham. Reincarnate won that race gate to wire. And then Newgate, the horse that finished second, is another Bob Baffert horse. And, so it was just kind of a tough way to read. So I think they're going to be a little bit more aggressive. Again, it's a horse that's certainly fast enough because his numbers stack up in terms of par, not necessarily has those big numbers as Bage, but fast enough in order to win. And again, as you mentioned, could just get that right trip. He's going to have first run, and he's going to have first run on Mage, so Mage will have him as the horse to run down.
Makes sense. Just a quick side note. I'm dying to know the answer to this. You don't have to go too far into it, but someone like yourself follow any sort of like jinx feeling, like, because the 1 and the 2 spot at the Preakness, has not done well for years and years and years. And you looking back at the Derby, like the 17 spot, never has won there. Like, do you fall into that mindset at all? Or, because you strike me as someone who's just like strictly like, hey, these are the metrics. I'm going off the metrics. I don't care about a jinx. I don't care if he's on the rail. I don't care if he's in the 17 spot. Am I right about that with you? Like, you don't care?
Yeah, I really don't, because so much of it is like situational. So I think like post 2 was like the one, right, that there hasn't been a winner of post 2 out of the Preakness, right?
I'm pretty sure. Well, maybe like way back, but 1 and 2,
Okay,
it's been, if there was, it's been almost 50 years, like for either
right.
of them, I think. So,
So the longest,
yeah.
so it doesn't really matter, but like for this example, right, the longest shot in the field is Chase the Chaos. Is this horse losing because he's in the 2 post, or is he losing because he's slow? Right? So
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
we're looking at these situations like, okay, I don't think the post, unless they, is going to impact this horse, he's probably going to need a head start. Like, if anything, right? We don't have to worry about where he is. And then the rail too is tricky. It's tricky in some ways too, because let's say it was Mage at the rail. I wouldn't necessarily bring out the stat, but I'd say, okay, look, here's a horse that hasn't been very quick out of the gate as of late, right? So he's drawn inside. He's got the other pace setters to his outside. If he breaks slow from the rail, then he's really going to get shuffled back. Then we know at that point he's going to be off the pace, and he's going to have to work a trip where he's going to have to come inside out, or he's going to have to hope that something opens up on the inside and things like that. But as far as a horse like National Treasure that has some tactical speed, Chase the Chaos doesn't have early speed. Mage, it's hard to say, but I don't think he'll be in front of National Treasure in the first quarter. And even Coffee with Chris, they're going to probably have to send, that's their best case scenario. So he's able to get out in front of those other 2 horses to be able to get position, and even from there could move off the rail at that point. So I'm not too concerned about it at this point.
Cool. Yeah. I kind of thought that that's the route you were going to take, but like, I like hearing you kind of reaffirm that. So that's good. I'm going to let you choose a horse in a second to kind of take me to, but I want to ask you about this horse because I really, if it's not going to be Mage, I like Blazing Sevens. He's coming from the 7 spot. He's 6-1. Ortiz is on this horse. Ortiz was supposed to ride Forte. So kind of really, and then he ended up on Cyclone Mischief and finished dead last. Like, this is a jockey who's hungry, clearly. And Blazing Sevens is a Chad Brown horse, and Chad Brown has had some success at the Preakness. He's ditching the Derby to really focus on the Preakness. This horse, from my notes, has not won since turning 3, or since last fall was the last time he won. But it's a horse that is definitely strong enough. He stayed strong down the stretch in the Bluegrass Stakes and finished 3rd to Tapit Trice and Verifying. 2 horses that were in the Derby. Tapit Trice obviously was a horse that was favored towards the top of the board in the Derby. So clearly good horses. And the fact that Chad Brown is, holding back, really training for the Preakness. They didn't get caught up in some of that stuff like those 3 horses waiting in the wings of the Derby, focusing on this race for a reason. It's proven, last year he won with early voting. So 6-1 and a horse that has some decent enough speed, another closer, as they say. But what are your thoughts on that? If it's not Mage, I'm kind of throwing my eggs in the 7-horse Blazing Sevens.
Yeah, I mean this horse is interesting, and you bring something up which is called intent, right? Because the intent is to run this horse in this race and bring him, and coming back this year. So he ran as a juvenile, and his season as a juvenile was good in the sense that even though he only had he had a pair of wins, breaking his maiden on debut and then winning the Grade 1 Champagne, but with each race he was getting incrementally faster. It was just getting a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster with each race. Never really running that big speed figure, but you like to see that with younger horses, right? That they're improving with each start, which shows you there's a move forward. So when they brought him back off the layoff this year in the Fountain of Youth, it was a 120-day layoff. And I remember going into that race, I think it was whether I was watching Works or not, but just saying he wasn't ready that day off the layoff. This is a horse that's going to need a race. He's going to get some racing, and he's going to be able to move forward. And he did that. He moved forward in the Bluegrass. And I think he's going to move forward again. I think we're going to see on Saturday the top Blazing Sevens that we've ever seen. Now, the question is that top good enough to win? Because he is a horse that right now doesn't have that fast number. Even though he came back, and I said he was improving last year as a juvenile, which could suggest there's still some upside as a 3-year-old. He paired on optics figures in 91, finishing third in the Bluegrass, and he closed out his juvenile season running a 91 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So that 91 speed figure is not fast enough to win. It's below. But if you're projecting he has another move forward, he's likely to show it in here. Is it as much of a move forward to win this race? We have no idea, but I think he's gonna run it. Like, this is the spot where he's gonna show where he fits, and it's just a matter of, and he'll be a fair price, because we talked about this. Mage is going to be the favorite without question. National Treasure is going to take money, and a horse we haven't talked about yet, but First Mission is going to take money. So Blazing Sevens can be kind of no worse than the 4th choice in this race. And then maybe some of the other horses in here take money and he doesn't. But, to me, he's a horse that I probably would need a little bit more than 6-1 odds, because he hasn't run fast enough to win. But a horse that I would definitely consider using for those reasons that we mentioned. He's going to be probably sitting on a peak effort.
Yeah, that was kind of the mindset here. I did throw like a little exacta together and had him, because you're trying to play the contrarian a little bit, like who's somebody that could, if you have him over a bunch of the other big dogs and it plays out that way, like that's a pretty decent ticket. So to me, it was the value and knowing the trainer and everything. That's why I wanted to call him out. So I'll throw it to you. Is there a horse that you want to talk about as, maybe if it's not to win, but to hit the board or for any particular reason?
Well, the horse I'm gonna key around and probably will end up win betting, just because I think the number will be fair, is the number 6 Perform. I don't know if you have that slide or if you want to pull that up or not. Yeah. But it's another horse that's sort of the same thing as far as Blazing Sevens, a horse that is just developing and getting better. And it took them a long time. As we talked about, a lot of the horses in this field, they broke their maiden first out. Their first race, they won. But Perform was a little bit opposite. He finished second in his first start. And then he caught some really tough fields, some very competitive races. A lot of the top names of horses that, Disarm ran in the Derby, Raise Cane ran in the Derby, Mage, he finished behind out at, so he's been holding his own against some of these horses, and he's getting better, and he's been getting better around 2 turns. And I go through every single race, and even though he doesn't have those wins, they're not bad efforts. And there's some excuses that come along, and excuses that are more subtle than what's obvious on paper. So even though he's just kind of stepping forward in those 2 most recent starts, it's like that ability has been there under the surface, and they might have just been able to get that to him. So he ended up coming back this year again, mentioned that race, the Mage race that Mage won on the lead by open lengths in his debut first out at Gulfstream Park. And then out of that race, Perform shifted over to Tampa, which is a different circuit down in Florida, raced around 2 turns, and was very impressive. A very dominant effort winning in that race. Made a couple moves, ended up winning by open lengths. And off that race, they put him in the Federico Tessio Stakes at Laurel Park back on April 15th. And that race is typically known as like kind of the prep for the Preakness, one of the more local Laurel's up in Maryland, a prep for the Preakness. And this horse should have lost that race 5 different times. He stumbled out of the gate. He checked behind horses. He had to move into kind of a softer pace. He moved, going towards the wire in the stretch. They dive him inside, which typically horses are like, no, we're not doing that. Then he has to angle out and just gets up. And it's one of those that, it's a type of race I don't see that often. And I watch a lot of horse races. I don't see horses do that. Now, that was against inferior company. So keeping that in mind, but at the same time, it still takes a good horse to do that. And so you have a horse that could just be getting better. The connections also, they didn't have Perform nominated to the Triple Crown, which that happens earlier on in the year. And so in order to run in this race, they had to pay a $150,000 supplemental fee, right? So I know for a lot of horse owners, that's probably pocket change. They're like, here you go, but that's still, a good amount of money to participate in a race. So at least shows some intent from that perspective.
If you're putting up $150,000 for the horse to run, as a gambler, I think you're alluding to the right point. Like, there's a reason for that. They're not doing that just so they can say that they ran the Preakness. Like, they're doing it because they think they can, do well in the Preakness. So I'm happy you called this horse out because I had a small amount of notes on this horse, but it was won the last 2 starts, continued and to be getting better, and this horse is hitting its full potential at this time, which is the right time for this race. And his pedigree is one that, it's got speed and it's got stamina. So it really is a good combination. 15-1 is a really good number too for a horse like that. So I'm glad you called Perform out. So happy
And
to hear that.
he's another one of those horses too that I have a really hard time understanding what his running style is. And so at least they're going to have some options. So they came from off the pace in the Tessio Stakes, but again, that was after stumbling at the start. So it doesn't have to be that far back,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, so I'll throw one more your way, and then we can kind of move on. I'll show you the exacta that I had there, and then we can start to wind down here. But I wanted to ask you about the 5 horse, Red Route 1. I don't even know if it's Red Route or Red Route, but however you pronounce it, Joel Rosario is on this horse. And what I've seen about this horse, first of all, he's 10-1 for anyone listening on the pod. And what I've seen about this horse is entirely one dimensional. It's got one push in him, and they've tried a number of different things. They've tried to run him on pace. They've tried to run him off base. They've put blinkers on him, and whatever the case is, like they can't, get around the fact that this horse is one dimensional. So dumb brain, me is thinking like Preakness is the right track for this because it's the shortest of the 3. And if you're going to take a shot at winning one of the crown jewel races here, he's just got to hit that one dimensional situation at the right point. So putting Rosario in the driver's seat to say like, hey, just make the right choice, do it at the right time, and we could be coming out of here with a decent shot here. So do you have any thoughts on the 5 horse this weekend, good, bad, or indifferent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is that. I mean, he's a horse that his last races, he's coming from way, way out of it. Like when they show the horses, out of the gate, he's like off the screen. You wouldn't know he's in the race. He's so far out of it. Yeah, you just look at like the first call. He's been 19 lengths off the first call, 10 lengths off the first call. So he's way back there to make that one late run. Which, when you have a closer, it is a liability. But you are getting compensated because he's not going to be the favorite. And that combination is always something like when I'm talking to people about racing or doing seminars and things like that. It's like, you're going to find those vulnerable opportunities when you have closers at a short prices. That was the scenario in the Oaks. The horse that was favored in the Oaks, wet paint, it's like deep closer at a short price. We got to try to beat her because she's going to have to pass 15 other horses in order to get there. And it just looks tough. Like this scenario is not going to go that way. Now, as far as I don't know if it's Red Route One or Red Route One. Sometimes it's hard to say. It's a little bit of a tongue tie. But those races out at Oaklawn Park, for the most part, where he's that far out, have been extremely fast paces. So keeping that in mind, this pace does not look like it's going to be super fast for this horse, right? Because we kind of talk about it. It's like there's not a lot of front runners. There's a lot of horses, even if Coffee with Chris decides to go, there's a lot of horses that kind of want to maybe sit first or second right off that pace setter. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to be like the Derby where they're just going to sprint early. So maybe that keeps, to your point, keeps Rosario a little bit closer. Doesn't have to be as far back. He's probably going to be maybe in the same place with Mage. And then it's going to come down to making that one run. And this horse can close. He can make a run. I think he's going to need a lot of racing luck, but I wouldn't talk anybody off this horse. It's just sort of like, buyer beware. You're going to get. It's a lot of drama with this type of horse. You're going to have to wait and hope that everything just kind of runs right at that right time at the wire.
Yeah, that's to me. It wasn't necessarily a horse I was looking at to win the race, but more so in maybe like a trifecta or a superfecta or something to maybe sneak in. And yeah, I mean, when I was reading about it, I've got a cousin who is I guess a scumbag. He likes Fast and the Furious movies. I don't know who does, but when they were describing this horse, I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking of like Vin Diesel, like hitting the NOS button, and like once he runs out, like that's it, right? But he's got that one push to try to get him, and is Rosario going to be able to do that at the right time? We'll see. But yeah, I mean, your analysis of it makes me feel good. I mean, I'm not gonna take this horse to win, like I said, but it's definitely one to maybe think about, underneath. So yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about First Mission. I don't know if that, we don't have to hit every single horse here, but we're close to it. First Mission is definitely up towards the top of the board. And I think they're saying that he might be one to get out in front a little bit. Brad Cox horse. Any thoughts on First Mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to kind of get that same trip as National Treasure, and those two horses just pretty much look like they're the most. If it's not Mage, those two look like they're the most likely to win the race. Now, whether that is what it is, but at least you can kind of make that case because First Mission really hasn't done anything wrong. He finished second on debut to a stablemate at that time. And then he's had a couple good wins since, but a lot of his trips have been very favorable trips, and he really hasn't shown all that much speed figure progression. So it's a horse that when he gets favorable trips, you know what kind of race he's going to get. But he's never really been a horse that's kind of like wowed or really stepped up, right? And he might just catch the right field and get the right trip in here, but I think he's going to be kind of the strong second choice in this race. I think they'll probably bet him. I know there's a lot of people that kind of see him as sort of the more likely upsetter in this race, more so than National Treasure, where, for me and my style of play, I just want to get way more creative in here because I'm not really like afraid to lose to a Mage or a National Treasure or a First Mission,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like
makes sense.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think he's worth talking about because he's a horse that when the coverage comes up and on that day will be a horse that a lot of people are talking about.
Last question about this is about First Mission, but kind of like thinking, like zooming out a little bit and thinking about horses in general. Like he's only got 3 races under his belt, as far as I see. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but that's the least amount in the field, I think. And so, I mean, Mage didn't have that much experience going in the Derby,
No,
so
he had 3
clearly, like,
starts. He had 3 starts as well. 3
yeah.
starts.
So
Yeah.
it's not like experience is like the end all be all.
Right.
So like, I don't know. Should the regular Joe Schmo gambler say to themselves, like, well, he's rested? Or, do you get scared off a little bit by not being in the big race? I mean, pretending Mage didn't just do what he did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, you remember those things because everything just becomes situational, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Generally speaking, for so many years, it was like the lack of foundation or not racing at 2 was like, it just doesn't work, right? But then it happened, and now we saw Mage win. So it's like these things can be flipped. It's just, it comes down to what that price is going to be when you buck those type of trends, right? A horse like First Mission, who is lightly raced, who's had favorable trips. Every race he's been in has been in a race that's, he's made sense as the horse that's, to win or finish second. And this is a tougher field than he's probably faced to date. So those are
Yeah.
things that when you're betting, you can sit there and say, okay, well, he's second most likely, but when it comes down to betting, like, what's that number? What's that
Yeah.
what's that second most likely number for you? You know?
Yeah.
Is it 5-2? Then you could say, if he's 5-2, I'll bet him. If he turns out to be 2-1 or 9-5, maybe you saying, oh, he's an underlay, maybe there's some value elsewhere.
I'm with you. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Let me show you the original bet that I'm going to probably bet a ton on Saturday.
Mhm.
But um, so you're talking about getting creative. I was trying to get a little creative here. I had my winner as Blazing Sevens, and then boxing up underneath in the exact, I had Mage, National Treasure, and Perform. So
Mhm.
any tweaks that you would make to this? I mean, do you hate this? Love it? Change anything about it? You want to steer me in the right direction?
No, I mean, really, you want in all of betting. I mean, it's pretty generalist. You just want your bets to maximize your opinion, right? So if you're strong on Blazing Sevens, then you have the right play. You're like, I'm going to bet this horse at the right number. I'm going to bet him to win, and I'm going to key him over the other horses in the field. And so what that opinion is telling me is, that's your key horse, and then you're recognizing that the favorite Mage is legitimate, right? First or second type horse. National Treasure, sort of the same way. Perform, getting a little spicy, trying to get some prices, a little bit of chaos in there, but not, but trying to play against First Mission, right?
Yeah, that's what
So
it's
I think
doing.
that
Yeah.
sometimes that's important to remember too. Like, I'd be a little bit more like, let's say you're like, oh, I'm gonna key Mage over National Treasure and First Mission. It's like, okay, well, yeah, you're gonna buy a lot of combinations that everybody else is buying, and they're just not gonna pay much
Yeah.
in there. But this one, it's like you have a price and you have a couple opinions, and that's how you're gonna play it. So I think that works.
Sounds good. So going to let you go here in 2 minutes. But I wanted to ask you about just a couple other things. So we'll go through with this race. We'll move on to the Belmont. Um, whether Mage wins this race or not, we've got the Belmont coming. Do you expect to see some of those bigger name horses that we saw at the Derby or didn't see with Forte and Practical Move? Because I'm jonesing to see these horses like on the big stage. You think that they'll come back?
I would say Forte for sure, and same thing with Tapit Trice because Todd Pletcher typically runs at Belmont. Both those horses are out of his barn, and I would certainly see them in there. Forte's better, and a lot of people have said right from the start that like Tapit Trice is their Belmont horse. They've like pegged him like way back when. So I think both those horses. Practical Move, I'm really not sure what because he's out in California. So again, we talk about the plane, right? They're going to have to ship all the way across the country to run in New York. So I just don't know what the plan is with him. I'm trying to think if there's like any other horses. Raise Cane, I think I saw something today, which was a horse that finished, was off the board, but gave a little bit of a try. I think they're going to point him to the Belmont. I don't think Two Phils will run in the Belmont. I don't think that's a good race for him. I don't like the timing and the distance for him. Um, in that race. I'm actually hoping they run it at Hawthorne. We have a Hawthorne Derby here, which is on the
Okay.
grass on June 24th, and I'm like, it would be the perfect race. Like it would be
Oh
so
yeah,
perfect, because
because he
he's
had
so
that grass win
he's
earlier, right? Or synthetic, right?
it
They
was
were concerned
synthetic,
about
but
that.
he's shown he can run. He can run on anything.
Yeah.
And it's a type of horse that when they kind of peak in their form cycle, which I think he did in the Derby to run that taxing effort, it takes a while to kind of get back to that. So that would be like a good starting off point, where running in the Belmont just wouldn't be the right race, just as far as like the distance and the timing and all that. So I doubt he'll run in that. I mean, anything can happen, but like my opinion, I don't think so. Um, and then tough to say with some of those other horses, that people like that didn't really show up, verifying. I don't know what they end up doing with that horse. Um, God, who else was in there? It feels like so long ago, like
It
2
does
weeks
feel like
ago, but
a while
yeah,
ago.
just
Yeah.
kind of um yeah,
I
but I
mean,
would
you hit the big
imagine
ones.
those Todd Pletcher horse, a lot of the horses that are based up in New York or New York connections will run at the Belmont. That's always a great day of racing. Tons of good stakes races that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now and I feel like the Belmont, gets screwed a little bit when there's not a Triple Crown hopeful, because you lose that audience that everybody's tuning in. But you're right, like there's a lot of stuff going on that day. It's definitely worth the worth the watch.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think they've done that by design too. They've kind of learned, like, maybe if we don't have a Triple Crown winner, where they've moved a lot of graded stakes races to that day, like the entire day. It's like one of my favorites
yeah.
because it's good grass racing, good full fields. Yeah, it's a good one.
So I guess this will be the last question I ask you, and it's like something that I've really wanted to know. Um, with the many hats that you wear, in your roles, when do you start like keying in on like the next crop? Because it feels like, just for doing like the NASCAR races every week, like it's hey, okay, new week, new race. But with horse racing, like there's horse racing going on at any moment of the day. Like you fire up the app, like you could do something like right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So it just feels like a exhausting amount of effort and focus that you have to have. So I'm just wondering, like, for this crop of 3-year-olds that are coming into this Triple Crown season, when did you start to kind of focus on them? And I guess looking ahead, right? Because we might not talk to you for a while. Like, when do you start to key in on? Like the 2-year-old season starts in the fall, I'd imagine, and like are you like hyper focused looking for these names, or do you kind of just like let them come to you or let them stand out? Just wanted to understand like that thought process real quick.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, it's horse racing is year round. I mean, it literally never sleeps. You race every day except for Christmas. There's a horse race going on. Um, so it's very busy. And then as far as optics, I mean, we just have a team, right? And so we kind of divide and conquer the whole entire country. So the 2-year-old racing actually starts in the spring. So
Oh,
the horses will start running in April. They're running shorter distances, but you really don't see like kind of the top juveniles, the top 2-year-olds won't start running until the summer. So what happens during the summer is we have those two boutique meets, right? You have Saratoga in New York, you have Del Mar on the West Coast. And during that period of time is where the barns kind of point, like I think this horse is the good one. That's typically where you see those horses kind of come out. And if you look, I mean, a lot of these horses debuted at Saratoga or from the West Coast at Del Mar. They at least made their first couple starts in there, but we follow them, all the way through. And then, to your point, you kind of let them come to you because we're watching these races anyways. We're really just watching these horses that sometimes as juveniles they come out really precocious and they're fast early, but then they don't develop, and then they don't really get any faster, and the other horses kind of mature and they end up passing that horse by. And so then we're watching these other horses that are just kind of slowly getting faster and faster with each race, watching their development. But yeah, it's a constant following these horses. I mean, even now talking about this race, it's like we talk about Blazing Sevens. It's like this is still a horse that's developing, that's on the improve, but having that information to know, okay, this is where he started. This is what he was doing day one. This is what he did day two, day three. Like, where's he going? Versus some of these other horses, it's like you see that backwards, right? They come out, they run. That could happen with Mage. That's a big question with Mage, right? He comes out, he runs his big speed figure right out of the gate. He wasn't even bet that day as a favorite. He was a longer shot horse in the race. And you're like, was that just like a freak? Did he just like freak on that day? Or are we looking at the goods, And I think that was still part of the reason in the Derby is like, you didn't know. And even as we're going into the Preakness, it's like, we're still kind of like, is he good? I guess he's pretty good. He did that, but he's going to have to hold it. It's tough, but it's a year round, constant, full team of people working on these horses.
I feel like I don't have the heart for it, right? Because I would get like attached to the first horse that won me money or like stood out to me and like clicked with me early in the 2-year-old season. And then like come January, they're not like in contention for the Derby. I'd be like, what the hell? Like, where's my guy? Yeah. Like, I need him. But I mean, look, I'm hoping Mage can get it done. I'm feels like if he were to win the Derby and the Preakness and then go out and win the Belmont, like if he were to get the Triple Crown, I feel like he doesn't have like the respect, at least at this point, that the others who did it recently have had. Like they were kick-ass horses. And I can remember like back, like looking at it, even at this time, right? Preakness, we were saying like these are horses that are gonna go out and get it done. Whereas Mage, like it's a question mark around every turn. So we'll see. If he were to win the Preakness, I would hope they throw a little bit more respect on his name, but we'll see how it goes. But I let you go here. I've held you for way longer than I had anticipated. So I tend to do that. I apologize, but
no, it's fine. I'm very fortunate. This is what I get to do, for a job, and I love it. I love doing this, and your audience is great. We got so much good feedback, and anytime I can really talk horse racing to an audience outside of horse racing, because it's so weird, like you're like, even when I stop and think about it, I was like, it's horses running around in a circle. There's a little guy on the back or gal, like it's totally like this like different world, and people don't kind of know what goes on to it. And once they kind of understand it, it's like, that's really cool. Like it's so cool. So I'm always like, I'm really fortunate that I can get in situations and talk to people that just haven't had exposure to horse racing, and people that listen and find it interesting and then come out. It's even better.
Well, I can't thank you enough, because I mean that hits it right on the head. Like I really appreciate it, and I learn so much from just following you. So everybody, make sure you're following at Emily Optics EQ on Twitter, and May Hemley is the name. Anything else you want to like mention there to plug there to follow you at?
I think that's it. Follow Optics EQ, because that's kind of my partner site, and where we have all the information. If you are playing and you need some data, some good information, follow us. We do like weekend specials, especially for these big weekends, and we'll do some race analysis as well. And that's $50 for the data for the entire weekend. That gives you every track. So I don't know, a lot of sports have data is free, but as far as that goes, I mean, our price is extremely reasonable for the amount of content that goes out each week. But yeah, follow those two. Twitter's kind of our prime, and then on YouTube as well. Optics EQ, if you can follow there, that's great as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily. Have you made any money this year on NASCAR at all? No? Yes. Have any time to play it at all?
I've had a little bit of time, a little bit. I had some good opinions that didn't work out, so it was kind of like the two fells where I just kind of like take my knocks and move on, but got the right price, got the right play. There was one weekend, maybe it was the weekend that I kind of tailed you on one that I followed. I think everything just went wrong, but it was like, I had the two drivers that spun out on pit road. It's like, how often?
Yeah.
And I'm on both. Yeah. I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah, that'll definitely deter you from playing every week. That's for sure. But hopefully, we'll get you something.
Being a horse player, gets me very prepared for that. So
Yeah.
I feel like I'm very seasoned when that happens.
Good. Yeah, that's a good mentality. Well, thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate it, and we hope to talk to you soon.
All right, very good. Good luck this weekend.
You too.